Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Welcome to the Finovate podcast. I'm joined today by Louise Beaumont. And Louise, you have so many job titles. I think you're up to 9 that I was able to see on LinkedIn. Can you start by just telling us what you do exactly for people who haven't met you or encountered you before?
Well, hello, Greg, and thank you very much for having me on the show. Yeah, let me explain who on earth I am and why I have opinions. Broadly, I do 3 things. So I work with legislators and regulators to create disruption, and I have several roles in doing that. I work with corporates to help them cope with that disruption, another couple of roles. And I also invest in and take board and advisory positions with those startups that I believe are going to exploit disruption, another couple of roles there. So all in all, I want to create disruption. I want to help people cope with that disruption to move us forward. And I also want to back those entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur myself, to back those entrepreneurs to really bring something different and hopefully better to corporates, better to companies, and better at a grander scale to the economy.
Well, I think coping with disruption is certainly applicable to where we're at right now. There's been some major disruptions that have been thrown upon us with the result of COVID-19 and the economic fallout from various economies around the world. We've been doing a series on the podcast talking to various people about how the fintech ecosystem is going to be changing as a result of some of these pieces. But I wanted to talk with you specifically about open banking. I know this is something that you're passionate about, and I think it has a role to play in terms of how we respond to this, both from a fintech standpoint and from a broader standpoint. So, what have you seen powered by open banking that is useful and really a testament as to why it's such a valuable concept?
Well, I think of the experience that we're all going through now with this coronavirus global pandemic this is a period of enforced and radical change. And it's really driving an opportunity to reinvigorate the real potential behind open banking. And what's really interesting is the innovators are stepping up. And I've got a couple of examples for you. I can't do justice to everybody because so much is coming through in terms of people leveraging simple technology behind open banking to drive real value for smaller businesses all the way through to large incumbents and ultimately our economy. But if I give you a couple of highlights, first of all, Experian, an established incumbent in the field, they've offered their affordability passport for free to customers.
Wow.
iWalker has launched an open lending platform. Funding Options, and I've got to declare an interest here, I'm an investor in Funding Options. They have partnered with 20 different lenders, and Funding Options will be using open banking data sourced through the consent of the small businesses who make those applications. They'll be flowing that data through to those lenders so they can make lending decisions on real, accurate, and historically accurate open banking data. This massively increases the speed and accuracy of lending decisions. COVID Credit UK is helping the self-employed prove their income, which is incredibly relevant for gaining access to government support. And AutoPay have launched a neighbour to neighbour, which is free for the UK's volunteers, those people who are helping their neighbours. So there are many, many more and more every day examples of companies which are using open banking at this time of enforced and radical change. So I think that's very comforting. People are stepping up. What I would like to see is that really driving the benefit through to businesses, to consumers, and ultimately for the economy.
Well, it's interesting because when we first heard of open banking a couple of years back, there was a lot of this, what you're talking about now is sort of presented as this theoretical idea of these things might be possible. There's sort of this, idea that off in the distant future, there could be some concrete benefits that come from this. And I think, a lot of the incumbents, a lot of the financial institutions in particular were somewhat resistant to that. And certainly in the United States, you have this kind of knee-jerk reaction to open banking in a way that's like, we don't want that. That's too difficult to pull off. And there hasn't been enough of a focus on the upside, the benefits that come from that. And I think one of the real benefits that we're seeing is now you can really see that demonstrable upside, what you can do through an open banking platform that you couldn't do before. And you can apply that in a way that really has the possibility to make people's lives better on a very low level, on the ground type of way. And in some sense, it is comforting, to use a word that you use, to see that happening, because I think we had, those of us who've been sort of looking at open banking for a while, had hoped that you would get there. Now, obviously, you don't want to see it come about because of a crisis of this magnitude, but there is a positive that you can take from it, which is that it is, to some extent, being able to deliver on some of that promise that we started hearing about back in 2015, 2016. So open banking is still something which some people have differing opinions on, but does this pandemic ensure that open banking becomes a success, that it's something that people look back on and say, I'm really glad we did that?
So logically, the answer to that is yes, it should. If banks want to, if lenders want to make swift, accurate decisions, either for lending from their own reserves or to ensure that the government's support reaches those who need it swiftly and accurately, logically, the answer can only be yes. This is the best, most accurate, fastest mechanism for ensuring the right funding hits the right companies at the right time to ensure that they survive this experience and that we as an economy exit with a swift upward trajectory. At the moment, the IMF is promising us all a 35% hit, I believe, in terms of economic impact for the quarter. Now, that's just logically. Of course, this works logically. Where you have to factor in some realities are the behaviors that we see from those lenders. Now, in the period since the pandemic started and it hit here in the UK, bank lending has tightened by 90 to 95%. They've just stopped making decisions. The lending is not available. So the lack of lending at the time when it is most needed and the government has promised that support means that the support is not getting to those who need it when they need it. And some of the explanations given for small businesses from the banks that they approach include things like, well, you don't bank with us, so we can't see your history. And this is ridiculous in a world where each and every one of those banks has implemented open banking. They can see the history of any SME that applies to them by simply hooking into open banking.
Right, that's the whole idea.
That is indeed the whole idea. So the fact that they are falling back on old ways of doing business at a time when new ways of doing business swiftly and accurately are available to them is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for those small businesses, those medium-sized businesses. It's also a tragedy in the making for the UK's economy, and that must weigh heavy on the mind of our Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, who's moved heaven and earth to get the schemes in place. And it is now the deployment of that support which is so very critical. So I would encourage each and every lender to make use of the technology which exists to help them get the support to those who need it swiftly and accurately.
One of the themes that's come up as I've been doing this series, talking with a variety of people about how fintech as an industry is going to be changing, one of the themes that has consistently come up is the idea that in moments like this is where you have the opportunity to create a real connection with people, with customers, from a bank standpoint, whether it's a small business customer, whether it's an individual customer, that how you treat people in this type of moment will define the relationship that you have with that individual or that business for the rest of their lives. And to hear people who are kind of falling back on those kind of tired tropes and say, we don't have the information to be able to make a decision for you, and that's just kind of factually incorrect. And so I think one of the things that I've also heard is that when people encounter that, they will also start to see alternatives. So there will be somebody out there who is going to be able to take these technological tools and do what needs to be done, and start to open up some lending and start to make some decisions. We've seen that time and again in fintech, that when there is an inefficiency, somebody else will come in and exploit that inefficiency. And so the challenge is sort of thrown down for any institution that wants to stay relevant beyond this moment, to be able to do what you can in this moment and to really look at the technological tools that are available to you and use them to help the people out who could potentially become lifelong friends, lifelong allies and customers. So I think there certainly is a little bit of a gauntlet being thrown down. So I'd like to end on the question, what's kind of beyond the open banking horizon as we look forward here for the next couple of years?
So I always think of my analogy for open banking is to think of the data daisy. So if you imagine a daisy in your mind's eye, yellow bit in the middle, that's your identity. And then all of the white petals around the edge of the daisy. At the moment, we have a sort of sad and fairly tragic little daisy with a couple of petals on it, but it's growing more petals of data. So we've got the data from the current account. We'll be getting data from lots of other different sources over the coming years. And where I look forward is open finance and beyond that, open data. So I should imagine that we would have pensions, insurance, all of those other, starting with your financial petals of data, you'll be able to plug in via your identity. And then as we add in further petals of data, which aren't distinctly about finance, that starts to create a richer blend of services that can flex and flow around you, delivering those hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive services, which are for you. Not a cohort of people that look like you in some kind of crass marketing segmentation model, but services which are literally for you, based on your history, based on your behavior, based on your stated goals and your potential to achieve those goals.
Well, I have to give you credit for the most vivid floral analogy that I've ever heard in the fintech ecosystem. So thank you for that picture. That was, I think, but it's really excellent. I think it illustrates the point. And there is obviously a lot still to come. And I love the idea of being able to look at every person as an individual, not as a group of people who are in a similar demographic situation, but as an actual individual. And hopefully, one of the benefits that comes out of this period of enforced upheaval is that we get farther towards that goal, and we come out of it in a place where we're again, not to say worth it for all the pain and suffering that's gone on, but at least we can say something positive came out of this. So I really enjoy that vision of the future, and I certainly hope that it comes to pass.
Amen.
Well, and Louise, thank you again for joining me on the podcast. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and look forward to being able to see you at a Finovate event at some point down the road, as soon as we're able to start gathering people together again en masse, whenever that may be.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Greg.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.